The Knife. A wandering dervish ran to where a Sufi sat deep in contemplation and said, "Quick, we must do something. A monkey has just picked up a knife." "Don't worry," said the Sufi, "so long as it was not a man." When the dervish saw the monkey again, he found, sure enough, that it had thrown the knife away. Cardan. Caravanserai. There was once a man named Mu'in, who was swindled and betrayed in his youth by another man called Halim, an unusually greedy individual. Mu'in said to himself, "One day I shall be in a position to pay this man back. I shall become rich, and his envy will ruin him, especially if I deny him money." But the years passed, and Mu'in did not become rich. His lifetime's savings would only have kept a wealthy man for a month. When he was 40, he became ill, and physicians said that he had only a few weeks to live. Now Mu'in had a Sufi preceptor, Daoud, son of Zakaria, and he asked him what he might do. "To arouse envy is no part of a Sufi's work," said Daoud, "for envy is a fatal rotting which kills a man by its feeding, and it can be extirpated only with the greatest of difficulty. The only method, in fact, is for the afflicted one to practice intense and real generosity, and that he is rarely willing to do. I can tell you this, and I leave the rest to you. The envious corrode themselves by what they think is true, not by the real truth." Mu'in pondered these words deeply. Then he sent for his son, Aram, and said to him, "I have very little to leave you, but I believe that I can settle a debt and make provision for you by a judicious investment if I do it now, so obey me in every detail. There is only a short span of life left to me." Aram, following his instructions to the letter, took all his father's savings and bought rich robes, some jewels, 2 beautiful houses, and much else. Then the father and son went to the most costly caravanserai near the villain's home and called him to them. Mu'in, weakened by exertion, was lying in bed. When he saw Halim, he said, "I am probably on my deathbed, and you are the only person whom I know in this locality. I have a son, as you see, and to him I will impart a Sufi's secret which produced all the things which you see as my possessions. Look after this boy Aram, and he will tell you the secret at the correctly auspicious moment, which I have confided to him." Soon afterwards, Mu'in died. Now Halim, who was quite rich, lavished presents on the boy and did everything to impress his kindness upon him, greedy for the Sufi's secret. He remained ever attentive in case the opportune moment for the transmission of the secret should occur. But Mu'in had told Aram, "Reveal the words of the Sufi to Halim if he has been generous enough to you, if you ever find that he is no longer greedy." So Aram watched Halim for years. Halim offered money, but never somehow gave as much as he offered. Aram took what was given, and he even asked for more, both directly and through intermediaries, to discover whether there was any reluctance on Halim's part, and he found a great deal of that. This process continued for several years. Halim suffered from fits of elation and depression, and started to interest himself in all kinds of diversions, such as gossip, to relieve the tensions of his life. Then one day he was reading a Sufi book which said, "To promise and not to fulfill prevents the transmission of Sufi secrets." He suddenly remembered that he had not fulfilled all his promises to Aram. The same day he offered Aram the balance of the very large sum which he had originally said that he would donate to him. Aram said, "I am no judge of why you did this, but since it may be for the right reason, I will tell you the Sufi's secret now." He told Halim what had passed between the Sufi and Mu'in. Now Halim, his greed overcome by his admiration for the wisdom of the Sufi, said, "Aram, I have no place in my heart for regret at the money which has been spent. Do just one thing for me. Tell me how to find this Sufi, that I may kiss his feet." That is the story told by Halim, the great Sufi sage, who eventually succeeded Sheikh Daoud, son of Zakaria. Fantasies. Oh man, if you only knew how many of the false fantasies of the imagination were nearer to the truth than the careful conclusions of the cautious, and how these truths are of no service until the imaginer, having done his work with the imagination, has become less imaginative. Shah Parak. Irrelevance. One of the Sufi sages appointed a deputy to transmit his instructions to disciples. Before long, however, the disciples took it on themselves to regard the deputy not as a channel, but as a man of sanctity and authority. He, in turn, started to imagine that everything he said was significant. Presently, becoming doubtful of some of the results of the deputy's actions, some of the disciples enquired of one another, "Is this man acting in full accord with his mandate?" Some of them regarded such thoughts as treachery and blinded themselves to all abuses. The sage heard the questionings and answered, "Vanity has taken possession of this deputy, but it has been nourished by your own desires to venerate someone." The disciples were crestfallen and asked, "If this can happen to a trusted representative, what might not happen in our case?" The sage told them, "It could not have happened if both parties had not been to blame. If you had been obeying my orders instead of creating your own imitation teacher, not satisfied with instructions and instead seeking idols, this would not have happened. But on the other hand, where those tendencies are present, it not only does happen but must happen. Instead of wondering at what has taken place, you should observe how incapable you are of distinguishing the false from the true, though you are not humble enough not to assume that the false is the true. That is your lesson." They said, "What is to become of him?" He answered, "That is not your concern. It is concerning yourself with the irrelevant which has hindered your development, and now you are still doing it. Far from being in advance of ordinary people, you are now far behind them. Do you want to catch up?" Fidelity. Najmaini, the man of the 2 stars, dismissed a student with the words, "Your fidelity has been tested. I find it so unshakable that you must go." The student said, "Go I shall, but I cannot understand how fidelity can be a ground for dismissal." Najmaini said, "For 3 years we have tested your fidelity. Your fidelity to useless knowledge and superficial judgments is complete. That is why you must go." The Sanctuary of John the Baptist. Sadi, the Sufi author of the Persian classic The Rose Garden, writes of a visit to the burial place of John the Baptist in Syria. He arrived there one day, exhausted and footsore. But then, as he was feeling sorry for himself, he saw a man who was not only tired, but had no feet. Sadi gave thanks to God that he at least had feet. This story, on the obvious level, means be grateful for small mercies. Its teaching on that level is found in all cultures. It is useful to help one to find a greater perspective in his situation if he is suffering from disabling self-pity. The employment of such tales for emotional purposes, to switch the mental attitude, even to make a person content with and perhaps momentarily grateful for his lot, is characteristic of the conventional type of instruction. Modern sophisticates say, "All that Sadi did was to inculcate so-called moral virtues. His work is outmoded." Traditional, crude sentimentalists may say, "How beautiful to dwell on the misery of others and one's own comparative good luck." But Sadi, being a Sufi, included in his writings materials which had more than one possible function. This tale is one of them. In Sufi schools, the piece is treated for what it is, an exercise. The student may benefit from whatever uplifting moral may be the conventional interpretation. But without introspection, but with self-observation, he should be able to say, "I realize that changes in my mood are dependent on emotional stimuli. Do I always have to be dependent upon seeing a man with no feet, or reading about it, before I realize that I have feet? How much of my life is being wasted while I wait for someone to tell me what to do, or something to happen which will change my condition and frame of mind?" According to the Sufis, man has better, more reliable inner senses and capacities for educating them than constant emotional stimulus. The object of the Sufi interpretation of this lesson would be nullified if it caused people to start an orgy of self-questioning of an emotional kind. The purpose of pointing out this Sufi usage of the narrative is for it to be registered in the mind, so that the student may in future notice a higher form of assessment of his situation when it begins to operate in him. The meaning. A man who had spent many years trying to puzzle out meanings went to see a Sufi and told him about his search. The Sufi said, "Go away and ponder this. IHMN." The man went away. When he came back, the Sufi was dead. "Oh, now I shall never know the truth," moaned the puzzler. At that moment, the Sufi's chief disciple appeared. "If," he said, "you are worrying about the secret meaning of IHMN, I will tell you. It is the initials of the Persian phrase, in huruf mani nadarand. These letters have no meaning." "But why should I have been given such a task?" cried the puzzling man. "Because when a donkey comes to you, you give him cabbages. That is his nutrition, no matter what he calls it. Donkeys probably think they are doing something far more significant than eating cabbages."